for me, COP29, it's an interesting sort of conjunction, I guess, because this should actually be a really important COP because we see climate change accelerating, the impacts accelerating and having significant consequence. Just thinking about the Spanish floods as an example. And yet I think it's probably fair to say that the expectations from COP29 are modest, even though it should actually be, I think, rationally a very significant COP because of the need to produce the next generation of national climate commitments next year, and so they're in perhaps with a more adventurous program on the COP. It could actually be taking that in a much stronger sense. When I look at the program, it's widely being sort of portrayed as a COP about climate finance. So climate finance for sort of core emission reduction and adaptation activities, climate finance for loss and damage. When we look at each of the existing arrangements and amounts of money that have been contributed to that, they are way below the assessed demand for finance. And there's also ways in which some of that money is being spent, so predominantly on emission reduction, whereas the anticipation was a more balanced expenditure with adaptation. Now, by bringing up the sort of global goals on adaptation and the mechanisms behind that, it could actually contribute to a more balanced expenditure between emission reduction and adaptation by having a more standardized and regularized way of assessing adaptation options and impacts, and hence proposals for adaptation. So these things could be linked together if the COP desires that to happen. There will be items covering carbon markets and the way in which carbon markets run, and that could be important in the future if that can be sorted out, so that you can effectively have carbon trading at an international level, but with confidence that those are real carbon credits and that they don't get double counted, and that there is additionality, sort of no compromise in how they're run. There's also an agenda on enhanced climate transparency. This is about how countries report on their activities in relation to climate change, and doing that with greater clarity. And I think that would be extremely helpful if that got moved forward. And the last item I want to mention is that there is a methane and non-carbon dioxide gas summit, which I think is becoming recognized as increasingly important. You know, that we can't achieve the Paris Agreement goals without significant action on reducing the non-CO2 gases like methane, nitrous oxide, and others. So it's not just about carbon dioxide alone. But in this case, there's not a lot of information on this summit. It seems to be more of a showcase of the US and one or two other countries' approaches, cross-sectoral approaches to reducing emissions. But it seems to me that might be a bit of a lost opportunity to have a more sort of global demonstration of how to achieve the necessary reductions in those gases.